for people outside the industry, they would never know, much about an elevator traveling cable, right? But that's really what sends all the signals. It's critical to the operation of your elevator, right?
Yeah, we consider the elevator traveling cable as more or less the umbilical cord for the moving elevator. So any signal or data transmission, electricity, anything going to the car is going through that cable. I was able to work on the first Tower of Terror for Disney.
Right on. Love it.
The challenge there was to design a cable for an elevator that's designed to crash. It had to withstand the robust, erratic behavior of an elevator. That normally, if I had a call from somebody with erratic behavior like that, I would tell them, maintenance of your elevator is your problem. It's not the cable, but that's designed that way.
Hello, and welcome to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group. I am your host, Matt Allred. Does your workforce need a lift? At the Allred Group, we are committed to connecting your company with top talent that matches your needs. Give us a call at 404-890-0445. Today's guest is Dillard Green, a manufacturing and engineering expert with over 4 decades of experience supporting the elevator industry. Throughout his career, Dillard has worked at the intersection of manufacturing, engineering, code compliance, and innovation, helping develop solutions for everyday buildings and iconic projects like the Burj Khalifa and Disney's Tower of Terror. In this episode, we explore the role of elevator traveling cables and the lessons he's learned throughout his career. Dillard, welcome to the show.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me. Looking
Thank
forward
you.
to it.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I've enjoyed our previous conversations and looking forward to this one. And it's interesting. You've spent 4 decades with one company, and that's a long time, especially by today's standards. What
Right.
has kept you motivated, curious, and engaged all those years?
I think just to be able to see the visibility of what I'm doing and how it affects service to the end user, as well as I'm working in manufacturing, so I'm very interested in seeing how products are made and kind of cradle to grave opportunities for seeing product solutions being implemented and helping people get solutions
For
implemented.
sure. Yeah. Do you ever feel a little bit of pride when you drive past a building and you go, "Hey, our product is running
Yeah,
up and down"?
hopefully that's a common thing in the industry, but whenever you work on a particular project, there's some satisfaction for sure and some realization that you put a little bit of effort of your efforts gone into a much bigger project.
For sure. For
It's
sure.
very
I
fulfilling,
mean,
of course.
yeah. When you first entered the elevator industry, did you imagine this would become a lifelong career, or was that more of a surprise as you kind of moved along?
No, not really. I started out in education background as engineering with a focus on manufacturing,
Hmm.
and I've always been intrigued how things are made. Younger days, take things apart to see how they work. So I got into where I work here. We were wire and cable manufacturer. So I started out in manufacturing here. Our sole customer base is the elevator contractor market. So at one point in my career, I moved into a field engineering, applications engineering position where I was interacting with the end user on job sites and helping with installation issues and product understanding and solutions. And that kind of put my other foot into the elevator industry. So I'm both in manufacturing and the elevator space as a current supplier to the elevator contractor market. So it's been a good dichotomy, I guess, of best of both worlds. But no, I never considered elevator industry. In fact, the building where I work is one story, and our city has very few elevators, but we do supply globally from here to the
For
elevator
sure. No,
market.
it's fascinating, fascinating, and obviously for people outside the industry, they would never know much about an elevator traveling cable, right? But that's really what sends all the signals, right? It's critical to the operation of your elevator, right?
Yeah, we consider the elevator traveling cable as more or less the umbilical cord for the moving elevator. So any signal or data transmission, electricity, anything going to the car is going through that cable. So it's a lifeline. It's one of many components in the elevator, but just like many others, it's critical to the operation of the car and its successful travel.
Yeah. You called the umbilical cord. In my mind, I saw an image of almost like the spinal cord, right? It's like if it
Yeah,
breaks anywhere along the way, you're gonna have a paralyzed car or totally non-operational. So
yeah.
it really is the central hub of all the communication.
It's kind of a critical link in the entire system.
Yeah, yep.
certainly.
So why can't a building just use an ordinary like off the shelf cable instead of inside of their elevator? Like what makes a elevator cable as specialized as it is that maybe a lot of people wouldn't understand?
It's a good question. I remember when I first came to this factory and toured as a job interview, just realizing, how hard can it be, right? Make a cable, put some wires together. We
It's
all
just an
have,
extension cord, right? Just
yeah,
plug it
yeah,
in and
we all have experience with extension cords and back in the day, telephone cords, believe it or not, but
for sure.
not so much now. But yeah, the cable, I'm involved in the design process as well, and a lot of the design attributes beyond the electrical characteristics. A large important part is the mechanical attributes of the cable. It has to flex constantly as the elevator is moving, and for many years, which makes it unique to a lot of cables in the marketplace. So there are design aspects to keep it where it'll flex continuously without any problems, and also it has to track in a very small space, in a vertical space of an elevator hoistway. It's very important that it stays where it's supposed to. So those are some of the differences to standard run of the mill cable.
Yeah, I mean, and like you say, it's got to flex, it's got to move. Is there a kind of a standard lifetime that hey, you got to? I've never heard people talk about that, but I'm just curious if like it's going to wear out after however many uses or trips
Yeah.
or what is
That's
that?
a very good question. We design the cables to, we say, run the lifetime of the elevator, and knowing that most elevators are at some point are modernized, and the elevator may still be operational, but the workings of the controller and various electrical components may be replaced as technology changes. But that's typically 25 years, 30 years, and we also our traveling cable has a lifetime warranty, which
Okay.
is indicative of some of that design and manufacturing experience. So yeah, it lasts a long time, but a lot of things are replaced in the meantime.
Yeah,
Sometimes upgrades are necessary for technology change.
for sure. And I hear people say that, and I've asked the question, right? I'm ignorant enough to that I can ask the dumb questions like, what at what point does it become a mod, right? I mean, I hear people say mods, and I've heard it said, well, that when you replace the controller, then it's a mod versus a big repair. Does the traveling cable get replaced every time you do a mod, essentially, or does it really depend?
I think in most cases it probably does. I'm not an expert on that, but typically if you're replacing a controller, that the controller dictates primarily what's in the traveling cable, as well as the peripheral components on the car, cameras and card readers
Right.
and things of that sort. So if you're replacing the controller, I would assume the traveling cable would be, I would assume all the time, but I'm not 100% sure. But we do
Yeah,
service the modernization market, service market, as well as the OEM and new install.
for sure. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, obviously, you mentioned you worked, design, manufacturing, field engineering, customer support. How has seeing every side of that business shaped how you solve problems today?
Yeah, solving problems is something that we like to look at, not just making cables, but we also sell a variety of other products. But manufacturing the cables is a core product for us. But we like to look at it providing solutions to the end customer, whether it's the product itself or how we deliver it or how we package it with other components. But seeing from being in different positions or different points of view, I think the common thing I would think about is the people. I like to think of our customers as we have internal customers and external. The internal would be within your organization, whoever you hand your work off to is your customer, and then the external would be the end user, the one that's paying for your service. And we all in life, we're all customers, all consumers, and we know what it's like to wait in a long line or have something that's not delivered when it's promised. And so we have to understand that. And I try to take those different viewpoints in dealing with helping customers solve problems. You know that they're maybe not the happiest day of their life, and you want to try to give them some reassurance, but you also have to be upfront and out in the open with what the options are, and just treat others as you want to be treated.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you told me a story once about where technology existed, but the code hadn't caught up yet. And I'm curious, how common is it for innovation to move faster than regulations? And a little bit more about that process where hey, this we know this is going to be coming into the code, but it's not here yet. And how do you kind of marry up those two pieces of building a product and getting it where it needs to be as the code is updated?
Yeah, that's a big lesson learned in the industry is, obviously everything we do is directed by various regulatory codes, but there's different layers of codes, and those of us in the elevator industry, of course, are very familiar with the ASME A17 codes for safety. There's also the National Electrical Code that is more of an umbrella over many products and services that are electrical. So an example that you're referring to is the electrical code stipulates general requirements for different types of products, and there's a section on elevator traveling cables and specifically under a flexible cable section. And that dictates, as an example, a minimum conductor size. What happened with us is that as technology changed and Ethernet cables, category cables became the standard in building infrastructures, naturally there were requests to have those within the traveling cable to continue the circuitry to the elevator. So you have internet access or on the car. That category cable is based on a smaller conductor size than what the code allowed. So that was a challenge. The electrical code specifically is updated every 3 years, and there's a process to appeal or to petition for changes. And if that's not approved, then you can do it again in 3 years. We've done that before to get the conductor size reduced, and initially we're unsuccessful in that. And so we still had demand for the category cables, so we went another route within the code requirements and designed and manufactured an equivalent category 5E pair using a larger conductor. That solution works quite well, but it requires an adapter to be able to get the larger conductor down to the smaller conductor connectors that are standard with Ethernet cable. So that's an example where we're held back by code to make something that was listed and certified. The final iteration with that, going back to the electrical code, was it was helped with, we petitioned again, as well as some other elevator industry professionals also petitioned, and we were able to get the change in the 2023 code. And so that was good and fine. But then the questions were, okay, it's in the code. Where's my cable? And what it's not as clean as that. Obviously, there's other codes around, and the for the manufacturer, we have to have a in our industry the UL has a specific requirement for flexible cables, specifically elevator traveling cables. And that's the code that tells the manufacturer the performance criteria, insulation thickness, and material types, all those types of things. So once the electrical code is changed, then the regulatory agency has to come in this case UL, and update their requirements. And we interviewed with them, and they interviewed other manufacturers as well to develop the change into the code to comply with the NEC.
Gotcha.
So
Yeah.
long story short, we were able to get a UL listing for a category 6 cable and a traveling cable after over a year and a half
I
from
was
the
gonna
time
ask, yeah,
we
how long does
changed
that take? Yeah, I mean,
electrical
it
code.
feels a little cumbersome, just as an outsider looking in. Like, in other words, I don't suppose elevators are being held up, but how do you navigate, hey, here's the code, the product, it sounds like, can't be made and sold until it gets the stamp. So what happens for that year and a half? How does that work?
Well, you have from my standpoint, providing technical support and answering customers' questions
Hmm.
in that regard. The answer initially is it's not commercially available. We do have other alternatives. We have use of optical fibers in the traveling cable, which can send huge amounts of
Okay.
data,
Hmm.
although it requires a different termination and maybe some
Sure.
conversion equipment. So there is a solution there. A little bit of resistance to that. If you're going from copper in the building, you'd have to purchase transmission equipment, which is
Yeah.
added expense. And as I mentioned, we also developed a kind of interim solution with the larger component
True.
Category 5E pairs. But it's kind of an evolution, and with codes, it's regulatory is there's bureaucracy and red tape, but it's also a tough job. The code
Sure.
committees have to go through who knows how many petitions every time they get around, and they have to prioritize those and choose what they feel is necessary. Of course, those of us on the manufacturing side and the industry side need to lobby harder, I guess. But it's the natural part of the process, I think.
Sure.
And
I mean,
the
obviously
goal is
there's
that
a
everything's safe.
Exactly, right. There's a reason there's codes. There's a reason there's
Yeah.
that much oversight, and it makes a lot of sense. And it does really kind of highlight your team and they need to be creative, right? And they need to say, okay, this particular thing isn't maybe commercially available, but we can still send the data, it sounds like, right? We can still
Yeah.
make something work, and we know how to, create adapters or whatever, some kind of termination hardware you talked about, right? That can make sure that the message is getting through the cable until such a time as we can do what we really wanted to in the first place,
Right.
which in that case may have been just a standard Category 5 cable. Hey there, listeners, it's Matt, and I would love to know what you want to hear more of on the podcast. If you have a topic in mind or a guest you'd like to hear from, head over to elevatorcareers.net and drop a suggestion in the box, or you can email podcast@elevatorcareers.net. The link will also be in the description below. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. Now, back to the show.
And then the interim, I try to educate the customer as best as possible to understand because it's frustrating. And it's not just us; it's any provider is held by those codes. So um, we try to develop products to anticipate code changes, and obviously everything has to align with the code in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's different codes in different
Yeah.
cities and different parts of the country, right? So you're probably, again, back to creativity, probably thinking a whole lot about, well, over here we use this because they're using that code, and over here we're using something else because they're using a different code. And then, there may be a way to, use some of those different solutions at different times, depending on who's changing the code, and then make it work
Hmm.
ultimately for the riding public. So
And we do some collaboration internationally. Our company is global, different codes in different countries. In this particular product, the European code was allowing smaller conductor sizes before we were here. So we do have experience in Europe with a similar product that's we've offered for a number of years. And sometimes I'd get a screenshot from a website asking, "How come you can't?"
why can't you sell me this?
Well, I can, but it doesn't meet the U.S. Requirements. So if everything was harmonized, then everybody's lives would be a lot easier, I guess. But that's true in so many areas with
Yeah,
unit
no,
and
I,
metric
I
being
get it. Yeah. It's fascinating, not being involved in those to just kind of learn a little bit about, it is a little bit like a legal process in a way,
yeah.
right? That it, has to be reviewed and voted on. And like you say, there's an appeal process and all kinds of things to get some changes. And ultimately it works out. It just takes a little while to get there. Yep. Very cool. And yeah, I mean, we were obviously talking about how it can take months or years sometimes before a new product actually reaches the market. Are there times? I mean, in a way, you're kind of, this is just my guess here, right? But you're kind of subject to what is approved, right? I mean, in other words, can you create and like develop new technology? I mean, at some point they would have to approve it, right? And does
Yeah.
that happen often that you're like, hey, this would work better? We're just going to keep asking until that is allowed to come out.
Yes. Yes. Innovation, anything we come up with, it's different. In our case, our products are listed by UL, Underwriters Laboratories, for use in the U.S. and North America. Anything we do that's outside of the realm of that specification, we can open a project with UL, and basically we would manufacture a product using, say, different materials or different components that are outside of the scope of the spec. And then we would submit them. Of course, we do our own testing, make sure everything works. But UL would typically look at it and say, if it can meet the performance criteria of our specification, then they would give us grant us the use of that additional material or whatever that's outside the spec. So that's done within UL because the national code, electrical code, is much more general. They're not telling us what type of material to use. They just, in the case I just described, it's just a conductor size limitation. Which, by the way, I learned the conductor size was introduced in the code, I think, in 1956
Oh, wow.
as a reason because they were worried about the wires breaking if they're any smaller than 20 gauge. We've had a lot of innovation since in stranding techniques and things, and now there's much smaller wires used on robotic applications and things like that. So it really fits easily in the traveling cable space, but it took till 2023 to change that from back then. But
Yeah.
anyway, there's most of the changes we do are not. outside of the electrical code, but rather
Sure.
outside the scope of the UL
And
manufacturer
VUL. Interesting.
specification.
That is fascinating that they have a way to open up a kind of preemptively, proactively, whatever the right word is, create, hey, we want to create this. And then they can kind of almost, supervise or, whatever,
Yeah.
pre-test it in a way, right? So that it's going to meet the standard once it comes out, and then they can put their stamp on it, and you're good to go as long as it's, I guess, part of the bigger code.
Yeah, and again, the regulatory agency is responsible to be sure it meets basic performance criteria, mainly safety from
Mhm.
fire and shorts and things like that. If we can make a product that still meets this performance criteria, then not always, but many times we will get an approval to expand our listing to add different components.
Yeah, yeah. There's been a lot of talk the last few years about the A17, I think it's .1 code, and the need for audio visual. How much has that affected the work you do? Or I mean, is it just a matter of throwing in an extra cable, or has that been a significant change?
I think the audiovisual requirement for emergency use, it certainly changes the components within the traveling cable. We have many different variations, and some are just different combinations of pairs and power conductors and the like. Um, I, we've seen an increase in the communication requirement with video, and I believe that the Cat 6A Ethernet cable would be a component that would be interesting for that application for sure. More so than replacing coax and shielded pairs and things to give you higher performance and
For
better
sure.
quality picture.
Right. Right. So, yeah, I mean, it does sound like there's been a lot of innovation. I know a lot of different suppliers and inventors that have created products that kind of work on that, and obviously have to communicate through the umbilical cord of the traveling cable. So very cool. So tell me a little bit. I was pretty intrigued when you told me you'd worked on the may say it wrong, the Burj Khalifa. Is that how that's
Yeah,
pronounced?
yeah.
And One World Trade. And what are some things that would need to be considered when designing cables for buildings like that?
Well, for you mentioned the Burj Khalifa, of course, is the tallest building in the world.
Hmm.
I had the privilege to work on that project early on, which was a real highlight because many times with the traveling cable, they reach out to you when it's time to get the traveling cable after the building's already in construction and you
Sure,
need the elevators to run in a couple of weeks. In this case, where I was actually able to be involved in the process before they started building the building, so it was probably four years earlier than when it was built. But anyway, in our first drawings, we had access to, and of course, I worked with the elevator company that installing everything. But as a supplier, the first drawing I had reference to did not have the building height on it because it's going to be the tallest building. What I've learned is it seems that any building that's being built to be the tallest, they kind of keep that a secret a little bit. And
they don't want to tell their competitors.
it's either a secret or they hadn't decided yet. I don't know, but
Sure.
we were, as needed basis, I guess. Obviously, that was disclosed later because it's hard to design a traveling cable when you don't know at that length what the length's going to be. So most elevators, design cables that have suspended lengths. They're plenty long for just about all elevators. But when you get into a building of that height, you have to reconsider, just the physical strength of the cable. Can it hold up? You don't want it to break or anything. So that was one aspect. But the biggest thing with that job was that there were a lot of weight requirements. Because you imagine just the restriction of that height, some of the things that had to be resolved just to be able to do that type of elevator. Things like hoist ropes, comp ropes, very heavy when they're that long, doing an observation car to the top of a building like that. So there were some different technologies used on those things, and we had, as a traveling cable supplier, we had a maximum weight load requirement for the cables. Generally, we design a cable and don't pay a lot of attention to the weight. It's just an output of the design. In this case, we had to really scrutinize the design and make everything compacted together as best as possible. And we also made use of a lot of optical fibers, which are much lighter than copper, obviously. So that helped get our weight down. But they also wanted an incredible number of components within the cables on the observation cars. And I think
Sure.
with those types of buildings, you always have a tourist element of some type of observation car that has lots of video screens and a very entertaining ride to the top. So that requires a lot of components that most elevators wouldn't have as well.
Yeah.
But
That's fascinating. I mean, you mentioned a couple things that caught my attention. One is just that the rope itself won't break, right? You stretch it up. What is it, 1,200 feet or something? I forget how tall that
oh,
building
it's
is.
100 and it's over 150 floors. I should have
Really
researched that a
tall.
little bit. Yeah.
So,
Right.
so the question of, hey, can we make one long enough that it's not so heavy that it won't just snap like spaghetti when we stretch it out? I mean, that's significant. And then the other one, just that it had to have all these weight considerations. I mean, you even told me that the cab itself was made from like ultralight aluminum.
Right.
It's so obviously it feels like to me they may be approaching the maximum capacity of elevator technology or maximum height.
Yeah, I think my understanding on that project was really breaking some barriers of maximum heights, but then, I guess resetting the bar what maximum is. But
Sure.
there are other projects in the works that are even taller that, at least in theory, can be done, but not with a traditional elevator components. Everything has to be reviewed and considered because ultimately, if there's too much weight on the car, there's no capacity for passengers. So you have to make room
One
for
at a time,
passengers.
please.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that was a unique challenge, but it was real rewarding to be part of that and
Absolutely.
see the
No, that
success.
sounds like a lot of fun, and yeah, just the engineering alone is has got to be, like I say, rewarding and memorable, and yeah, no, it's fascinating. So, a couple questions for you before we end, and one is, looking back in your career, what project or accomplishment makes you the most proud, and why?
Well, the first one comes to mind is the Burj Khalifa, just because it is the tallest building in the world. But I've
Sure.
been involved in some other unique projects. One that comes to mind is kind of obscure for most people. Don't think about it, but I was able to work on the first Tower of Terror for Disney.
Right on. I
And
love it.
the challenge there was design a cable for an elevator that's designed to crash. The elevator is designed to fail. It has a free
You know,
fall element.
yeah, and I didn't. I mean, I rode that 30 years ago with some friends, college or
Yeah,
whatever. But I think we went through it 15 times. It wasn't busy that day and just over and over and over. So reflecting on that, I mean, obviously, probably not your area of expertise, but it's designed to fall and to go back up and fall, right? So there's, I really didn't think about it at the time, other than it was just a fun ride. But
yeah, and I
uh,
I tried to get a trip there to help observe installation or assist or whatever, but Disney has all their own, as you can imagine, their own Imagineering department. They do all their own install and maintenance, and basically deliver product to their gate, and they take it from there. But it had to withstand the robust, you know, erratic behavior of an elevator. That normally, if I had a call from somebody with erratic behavior like that, I would tell them, "Well, you have to, maintenance of your elevator is your problem. That's not the cable, but that's
sure,
designed that way." So that was a unique one. That was kind of fun, and that's, as you said, that was a long time ago. Evidently, if you were there 30 years ago, um,
I yeah,
and
it
it's
was right
probably
at
right. It's been doing this for a little while, but and we've had, that was the first one was in Orlando, and then of course there's others. I
yep.
think in Disney Euro and places like that. But
Yeah. So they wouldn't give you a backstage pass to
no, they
see it.
told me
They said, "No, just come buy a ticket and you can ride it all you want." But
exactly. Yeah, like
very
everybody
cool.
else. So
Yeah. Yeah. So last question I have for you. What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out, right? Maybe it was young Dillard just coming out of college. What would you say to them?
one, take advantage of every opportunity that's afforded you. If you're working for a company that offer training, take that, and really do well with people. I think coming from a technology background, there's not always the people element there, but I think whatever role you have, working with people makes things a lot better. Dealing with the customer, obviously, but even working within your organization, understanding that we all have similar needs, but maybe approach them a different way and try to collaborate with others so that different viewpoints can often, the synergy can give a larger sum than what individually would provide.
So true. Yeah. Well said. Dillard, thank you for being with me today. I've enjoyed it and I appreciate you being on the show.
Okay, Matt. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, sir. Take care. Thank you for listening to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group. a leader in elevator industry recruiting. Please visit our YouTube channel at Elevator Careers or check us out online at elevatorcareers.net. Please like and subscribe, and until next time, stay safe.